Hi, I'm Phill Klein, and welcome to First Principles. You know, freedom is not complicated, but it is challenging, and certainly maintaining it is always a challenge. Thurgood Marshall in 1989 wrote in a dissenting opinion in Skinner versus National Railway Executives, "History teaches us that grave threats to liberty often come in times of urgency, when constitutional rights seem too extravagant to endure." And we're now living in a time when many governors throughout this nation have determined that basic civil liberties are too extravagant and our nation's Bill of Rights are too great a burden to their aims. Good intentions or not, political speech has been silenced. Good intentions or not, laws important to election integrity were sidestepped and undermined. Good intentions or not, some governors have declared that they are no longer part of the lawmaking process with the elected legislatures, but rather that they are the law, elevating themselves above the law. In the past year and a half, 2 years, I've been working with the Amistad Project, directing it, and I've had the pleasure to work with a gentleman by the name of Tim Griffin. Tim Griffin is a good friend and a former assistant county prosecutor. They call them Commonwealth Attorneys here in Virginia. He has a long history of being involved in politics and also on the side of justice. And he was retained by the Amistad Project and had a very, very challenging job in going out and motivating and engaging people and encouraging them to gather and organize and act to protect their freedoms and liberties. And through that, he has traveled around the nation over the past year. He's our guest today, and I'd like to welcome him to the program. Tim, it's great to have you with us. Let me pull you up on my screen. How are you,
thanks.
buddy?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. I understand you're in Lynchburg right now.
That's right. I'm happy to be home.
And there's been no grass growing under your feet.
That's right. That's right. Lots of work to do.
Yeah, you've been around the nation and you've been forming these voters alliance groups and spending time with voters over the past year. I'd like to ask you this. What is the primary attitude in the nation right now? What do you sense among people?
We sense that people are frustrated with the election results. People feel like their voices were not heard, their votes were not counted, and there's a lack of trust right now in our election systems. And so people are kind of questioning, what do we do next? How do we regain trust and value in our election systems and know that we can trust what happens at the ballot box?
Is that the way they put it, Tim? I mean, really, I understand what you're saying, but that sounds like a lawyer. It sounds like what we're trying to do, you know. Really, what are people's attitudes? Are they turning away from government? Have they given up? Is there anger to the point that it causes them to engage in any particular type of action? What is the sense?
People are saying this election was stolen. How can I trust election results? I've heard a number of stories from people saying, my brother, my uncle, my son, my daughter says, I'm going to vote for the first time, but now I don't trust it anymore. The election was stolen. How can I convince people to go out there and vote if they can't trust the system? So they're speaking in very understandable terms that the election was stolen. They don't trust the system.
Now, let me play devil's advocate a little bit. And you know the critics who criticize you and I and what we're trying to do, they would say, well, you just should go back to them and say, look, it wasn't stolen. Trust in the process. What do you say to those people?
Well, we see a lot of that, especially out of politicians, this top-down leadership where they say leaders need to go down and they need to tell people what it is. But regular Americans, they understand what happened in the election, that they understand that something was off and something was not right. And so no amount of top-down leadership is going to convince them otherwise. I think leaders need to start listening to what people are saying at the grassroots level if we're going to understand what their attitudes are going forward.
Now, you know, as part of this effort, as we designed it from the beginning, we wanted you to multiply the eyes and ears in the field regarding the election. In other words, go help organize these grassroots efforts and get people to the polling places so they can watch what's going on. Let me ask you first, as it relates to this, Tim. Yeah, how old are you?
36.
36. Was this election different in your experience from past elections that you've experienced? And if so, how?
Absolutely. Years ago, I used to really pay a lot of attention just to polls and what newspapers would tell us. In recent elections, I really pay attention to what's going on the ground. How are people? What's the excitement level? Are people excited about their party? Are they excited about their candidate? Are they engaged in the process? Right. And so that's something that I did going into this election. Is I kept my eyes open, I kept my ears open, and people were crazy for this election, especially Republicans on the right. They were so excited. There was a parade in Arizona, a car parade of 90 miles long of cars for Donald Trump. And then we also watched what the energy was on the left, and the energy on the left was very deflated. There wasn't a lot of excitement. There was no rallies for President Joe Biden. So that's the kind of stuff I pay more attention to now. Is how are people that I know, that I come into contact with, the yard signs that I see driving down the road, what am I seeing with my own eyes and ears? And that's something that I paid attention to a lot with this past election.
Now, let's speak to that, because every election, and as you know, I held office as Attorney General and a state legislator in Kansas, energizing the base, so to speak. That portion of the population that really engages politics is so important to build momentum towards an election. And of course, that was stifled this year because of the pandemic. And in fact, many of the orders of government that I've been critical of said that you couldn't gather, you couldn't speak. What was the attitude among the grassroots about these types of orders? And is there a concern that you might have about their application as it relates to political speech?
Yes, and that was one of the early decisions by Amistad, working with you, that we identified Michigan, and I know that you have ties to Michigan. That's one of the reasons we really zeroed in on Michigan, is because you were already aware of what was going on there. And when we got to Michigan, we realized that there was a lot of activists on the ground that felt like their hands were being tied behind their back. The incumbents have the opportunity in politics to raise the money to get onto TV, to get onto radio ads. But if you're somebody that's just running for office for the first time, if you're a grassroots activist that wants to get involved, you don't have the opportunity to engage in the media like an incumbent does. And so what we saw in Michigan was incumbents like Governor Gretchen Whitmer and others who were kind of making sure that they were protecting themselves in political speech, but they weren't allowing others to really engage in the political process. And there was a lot of frustration on the ground about that.
That's something that you and I have talked about, and it's a point that I don't think our nation at all has really spoken of. And that is that these emergency orders and saying that you can't gather, you can't march, you can't have political rallies really harmed challengers to those in authority. And these orders were issued by those in authority. And yet no one has spoken about how unprecedented it is for an executive branch official who has an election coming up that directly impacts their job. They might not be on the ballot, but I'll tell you what, who gets elected in those other positions impacts them. And they're changing the rules of the game. They're suspending state laws and changing the rules, and they directly benefit. Now, you said it caused a lot of frustration. How's that leave people? I mean, are you hearing that people don't believe that they have the right of franchise, that it's a government of the people anymore?
Yeah, and that's a lot of the people that we've worked with, Phill, that we were able to meet on the ground. They weren't necessarily Republican. They weren't necessarily Democrat. They were people that were frustrated because they felt like both parties weren't fighting for them, right? They were taking political positions, but when they said, we want to open up our restaurants, we want to see our loved ones, we want to interact with the people that we care about, government on both sides was preventing that from happening. And so what we've been able to work with is, I think, people from all sides of the political spectrum that have said enough is enough. And that's continuing to go on to this day.
Now, you heard about Governor Whitmer, and I know others have, Governor Wolf, all across the nation. Governors have taken credit for saving thousands of lives with these various lockdowns. Have they considered the cost of the lockdowns?
I can't speak to what sometimes these politicians are thinking, but you're right, and this is what a lot of the lawsuits that you've directed with the Amistad Project have gone after, is the fact that the damage that these orders have left for businesses, for families, for relationships, It's going way beyond this year. I mean, people are still feeling the impacts in 2021, and they're organizing even now, especially in Michigan. They're going around right now passing First Amendment resolutions. I spoke to Sheriff Darleaf up in Michigan, and he mentioned you, Phill, because what they're doing right now is they're trying to push back. And I think that especially up in Traverse City in the northern part of the state, they're getting ready for tourist season. And they're wondering, is our governor going to let us open up our businesses? Is our governor going to let us rent out our Airbnbs? Are we going to be allowed to have people up here we can start making money again? Or are we going to have our businesses shut down for the second year in a row? And people are really frustrated.
Yeah, as you know, one of the keys to being able to build into any future dream is the rule of law and being able to rely on it. In other words, some type of certainty so that if you invest your energy, your time, your passion, and your finances into something, that effort will be respected in law by allowing you to do it. And there's a lot of uncertainty as to law right now.
Yeah, there is. And I feel especially bad for restaurant owners up there because, you know, we've heard of restaurant owners that they pour their entire life savings into opening up this restaurant. There is no second bite at the apple for them. This restaurant has gone out of business, and it's not like they have the ability to come back whenever the governor decides to open up the state again. They are done, and there's no coming back from that. We have one life to live. I think there's a lot of frustration about that.
Now, you've been to, my goodness, I don't know all the states you went to, Tim, during this time period. I mean, every swing state plus more. And you met a lot of people. Who was the most interesting and why?
You know, we were able to make friends like Patricia Farmer and Linda Lee Tarver, who are African-American leaders in Michigan, who said, you know what, I understand that the culture that I come from, the people that I may have associated with previously in my life may not agree with my political decision to step out for conservative values that stand for free people and free markets. And especially, you know, in those respects for Donald Trump, because of what he offered on the economy and on conservative judges and on freedom issues. And they stepped out. And I remember Patricia Farmer specifically talking about living in Detroit, living in the city of Detroit, and taking a stand as an African-American woman for Donald Trump. It was a hard decision for her, but she felt like it was the right decision. And she felt like young people in her community needed to see leadership of her age group really stepping out there and taking a stand and not being afraid, because there's a lot of intimidation in different Democrat communities that you're not allowed to step out. You're not allowed to say things that don't follow the party line. And I think Patricia Farmer, Linda Tarver, some of those people in Michigan were really inspiring. It taught me something about leadership.
You know, that's interesting. You're speaking about the cultural risk, I assume. I know that the left is trying to translate some of that into actually a legal risk in saying certain things or stepping out. But let me explore that a little bit more with you. I'm curious as to what you think. Now, I am 61 and you're 37?
36.
36. Sorry about that. You know, we're cross-generational here. And when I grew up, if somebody wanted to explore my background and they wanted to learn about what my medical condition was, and they wanted to learn about how I socialized, and they wanted to learn about who my friends were, they would essentially have to break into a doctor's office and get in a file cabinet, you know, kind of like Watergate. You know, the president couldn't have hackers. The president had to, somebody broke into an office. They would have to see how I did academically. They'd have to break into a school. And today, all of that information is aggregated. It's all pulled together, much of it by government, and it's accessible over what we're doing right now in this technology. And I can learn about you without ever meeting who you are. And what let me try to get to the question, Tim. I think our culture, we're living in a time where there's a lot of intolerance in the name of tolerance. In other words, we're very quickly to judge other human beings based on a digital footprint or what somebody says about them based upon how does that affect you? Does that frighten you? Do you sense fear in the electorate about this cancel culture, this judgment that can come crushing down on your head at any moment?
Yeah, Phill, there's a lot of discussion about this. I mean, I think, you know, the first time I had heard about you is some of the issues that you went through in Kansas. And we've seen that with other politicians, Governor Bob McDonnell in Virginia, Rick Perry went through it in Texas. Now what we're seeing is it's happening to the Attorney General of Kansas, Attorney General of Michigan, actually has been tweeting at a former state senator, which kind of had a chilling. It seemed to want to have the ability to chill that senator's speech. We're seeing there's an attorney in Michigan named Matt DePerno who has filed a suit seeking information on voting machines. And leftist activists have helped shut down his bank account, his malpractice insurance. So what we're seeing is it used to be just reserved for people like you when you were an attorney general and the top politicians in the state. And what it's doing now is it's coming down to the very bottom. They're going after attorneys. They're going after your professional license. And it's really trying to go after.
How do we navigate out of these woods? How do we get to a place where the world's so-called leading democratic republic can have faith enough in itself that we can have vigorous discussion without condemning individuals?
Well, I think that people of all political spectrums really need to go arm in arm and say enough is enough. This person may not agree with me, but we're going to have a debate about it, right? The only way that we can get to the bottom of this is a debate. And it's, I've heard people say they're really frustrated about the election results. Well, the way that we solve these problems is in the courts, right? What we want attorneys to go to courts on behalf of clients and file lawsuits. And that's what prevents us from going much farther down the road in a place that we don't want to go, right? We want the lawyers fighting this out so that people feel heard, so that we have resolution to our issues. And if we take away that opportunity, I'm fearful for where the country is headed next in solving their disputes.
Do you sense, Tim, that underneath the political posturing in play, that there's a recognition that this is getting out of hand? Or do you believe that we truly now have a large group of people in America who think that your rights are dependent upon what group you're a member of, and that those rights are measured based on those who have authority and are not inherent? Have we crossed over?
I hope not. It's a great question. I mean, obviously, you speak to the fact that our rights come from God, right? That comes from the Declaration of Independence. What we're seeing now is certain political parties saying, if you don't agree with our political position, you're not allowed to have the other side of this issue. We saw Senator Rand Paul talking about this on CNN recently, where the reporter is saying, this is the only set of facts. And he's saying, no, of course not. There's two different points of view. And your job as a reporter is to allow both points of view on TV. And the reporter wasn't doing that. And we're seeing that more and more where they're saying you can only have one point of view. And it's really scary to see that.
Now, have you ever been in a situation where you've been frightened to speak?
Luckily not. I mean, I feel empowered by the Amistad Project, by the people that I've been surrounded with to be able to step out there and speak. But I do know that, even at my law school that I attended, there are professors there that call people out publicly on social media for endorsing Republican candidates, endorsing Donald Trump and Donald Trump-backed candidates. And it seems like a veiled attempt to start canceling people that they don't agree with. And it's frustrating to see.
Name somebody who you entirely disagree with, but whom their free speech you would stand up and fight for.
I would, anybody supporting Joe Biden in this last election, I didn't agree with.
That's a lot of people, Tim. I'm talking about somebody of a national stature that you really disagree with, but that you force yourself to listen to.
There's all kinds of people that Eric Holder right now Stacey Abrams is a good example. Stacey Abrams is somebody who is fighting election integrity issues in Georgia and other states. But she has the right to get out there and make her case that we need to strip away election rules. I don't agree with her position on this. I think the ideas are even dangerous for our elections. But she has the right to go out there and say it and to fight for it.
I brought that up because I think a lot of people would name a person, but not even know the fullness of what they're speaking about, because we've come to a point where we tune people out so quickly. And for a vigorous debate, you have to listen as well as speak. And then you even have to defend the right to speak of those with whom you disagree. And somewhere we've kind of lost that understanding in our national dialogue. Do you in your youthful age, do you Have you seen this change over time? I certainly have, but of course I've been on this earth for 6 decades plus, but have you seen it change over your involvement in government?
Yeah, I've seen a generational change. I mean, I meet people all the time that are willing to march in a BLM rally and say that they're fighting for civil rights. And meanwhile, they're sitting on the sidelines during the greatest time of civil rights upheaval and government taking our rights in our lifetime. So I definitely see a generational divide on what it means to be an American, what it means to have the rights that we've always enjoyed.
What do you think the primary role of government is?
Well, I mean, I think government's role is to, protect good and to punish evil, to protect freedom, free people and free markets, and to stop people that would interfere with that. And I think what we've seen in the last year is governors deciding that it's their job to protect health as if people can't protect their own health. And in the process, they've assaulted rights, they've assaulted businesses, and all the other subjects that we've talked about. They've had the opposite effect of what they're supposed to do.
What would you like to see happen over the next 10 years?
Well, I'd like to see a value placed back on individual rights. Right now, it seems like we have a shifting focus on collective rights in this country where we have to protect everyone's rights, right? Like this person has to get a vaccine because you are responsible for protecting everyone else's rights. And I think when we lose a focus on protecting the individual rights, it's frightening for everybody else. When I was a prosecutor, as you were a prosecutor and attorney general, a public defender was appointed for every criminal defendant, no matter how bad a crime was. And the thinking was that if we protect the worst among us, it protects the best among us, right? We can't pick and choose who we give civil rights and constitutional rights of protection to. So we have to do that for everyone. I'd like to see us return to that.
So what I think I hear you saying is that instead of measuring an individual based on what they've done for society, that there's an intrinsic value to every human being, and we should be treated equally before the law, and government should respect our inherent rights. That's
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think we'll get there again?
Well, I think we have an obligation to fight for it. And I think if we fight hard and we trust in God and we put our priorities first, I think we can. And I think the Amistad Project and you as director has been a leader in that.
Are you going to stay out there and keep at it?
I hope to, as long as
you better. We're counting on you. Tim, I really appreciate your time and in joining us. Anything that you want to offer before we sign off?
No, I just think that in the last year, we've seen people waking up that, the cavalry is not coming. We heard all kinds of theories over the last year that if we wait, this person will help us, this court will help us. But I think there's a recognition across this country from grassroots activists that they are the cavalry, right? The cavalry's not coming to save them, but the good news is that we are the cavalry. We can make a difference if we step up and do it. And I'm seeing that across the country. So I'm just amazed by what's happening.
Tim, thanks for what you're doing. It's an honor to work with you, sir. And you've been doing great work for the past year and a half, and I know you're going to continue it. Thank you. And for our viewers, Tim said something that I'd like for you to consider. And he said it in a very humble way. And I want to unpack it a little bit. He said, look, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And basically he didn't answer the question of whether he thought it would be successful, whether this nation would steer the course that we desire it to steer in the next few years. But by his answer, he said it doesn't make any difference. Certainly it makes a difference in our lives, but it doesn't make any difference about what our obligation is right now. And our obligation at this moment, without even knowing what the result will be, is to stand up for what is right and to do what is right. And that's how America will find its course. For those who have the courage to stand up, not measure the ghosts of the future about how it might impact them personally, but be willing to sacrifice, engage, and fight for a cause beyond self. That's where America's greatness lies. That's what we're all called to do. Thank you for joining us. Phill Klein, First Principles. I hope you can join us in the future.